I've been with the National Safety Council for 7 months, leading their efforts on distracted driving and teen driving. So how dangerous is cell phone driving? Well, research from more than 75 peer-reviewed studies have clearly shown that using phones while dangerous is driving. Several studies have reported that the use of cell phone increases the crash risk by a multiple of 4. These studies also found no difference in handheld versus hands-free devices. It was just talked this morning a little bit about the difference in distractions, cognitive, mechanical, visual. I would point out to the committee that we all understand when we're visually and mechanically distracted. We don't know when we're cognitively distracted. It's actually mentally easier for me to have this conversation when I can look at you and see you're engaged and see if you're about to say anything than if I was trying to imagine all this on the phone while I was having this conversation. We've been driving vehicles for 100 years, been talking on phones for about 75. We've only combined those two activities to any great degree in the last 5 or 10 years. And we never understood the cognitive demand of a cell phone, of a telephone conversation. We understand that now. So how do we address the issue? Obviously, we do it through legislation, enforcement, education, and technology. We've talked a lot about legislation enforcement. I just want to point out we believe strongly at the National Safety Council that education will only work in the presence of good legislation and enforcement. For years in the seatbelt and even drunk driving campaigns, we worked hard to just educate people about how dangerous it was, but it wasn't until states passed laws and we combined the two and did high visibility enforcement that we really started to make a difference. So we've got to have both. Even the National Transportation Safety Board has looked at this evidence, and they've put a policy in place banning all cell phone use for their employees. I think that's significant. The National Safety Council has 20,000 corporate members. We know that at least 500 of them have already looked at the science and said this is dangerous, we can't have it, and they've put cell phone driving policies in place banning their employees from using all kinds of cell phones, handheld and hands-free. Lastly, I want to mention technology. Strong laws visibly enforced combined with education will help address this epidemic, except please note this is, and it was mentioned earlier, this is a unique distraction. It is very, very difficult for us to ignore a ringing phone. It's even probably more difficult for a teenager to ignore an inbound text message. There's a compelling, almost addictive nature of the demand that's put on us when that phone call or text message comes in. So laws will help. They'll start everything in the works. Education will help, but we really believe that this is an issue that needs to be addressed by technology. I have met with, the NSC has met with, and we're encouraging several entrepreneurial companies. There's at least 8 of them out there that have great ideas. There's at least 4 of them that have demonstrable product available in the very near future. 3 of these companies should be to market with very early versions in the next few months. One company has had their technology tested on one of the large wireless operators, and the technology test was successfully passed. These products are out there. They need to be encouraged. The wireless industry sitting here at this table, the auto industry sitting here at this table, and government agencies like the FCC with proper engagement can dramatically shorten the time to market for these life-saving technologies. These small companies are finding, like most startups, that they're challenged with issues of capital and getting the attention of the large wireless operators, auto manufacturers, just getting phone calls returned. So I think of all the things that this committee might do, that could be the best, is to encourage attention given to these technologies and get them to market. Some of them are just amazing. I don't have time to get into them now, but some of them even involve safe forms of communication. They don't just shut the phone off. The 20-year-old woman who ran the red light causing the crash that killed my son, she was on the phone with her church at the time where she volunteered for kids my son's age. She was recently married, looking forward to leaving for basic training with her husband, who had just enlisted in the United States Air Force. Obviously, her life has been ruined as well as ours. She was a good person. I'm absolutely convinced that if she knew what I know today about how dangerous this activity is, or if there was a law in Michigan at the time prohibiting cell phone use, she would not have been on the phone and my son would be alive today. There's no phone call, email, or text message worth a human life. So, thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Ditlow for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stearns, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The Center for Auto Safety supports federal regulation on the technology of cell phones and other communications devices, and we support state enforcement programs. We think a combination of the two must go forward. And in that regard, when you look at technology, some of the devices are already integrated into the vehicle. And in 2007, the Center petitioned NHTSA to issue a safety standard that would disable devices when the car is shifted out of park into gear. NHTSA denied our petition, but what we found out was that we had missed a huge opportunity to advance the cause for safer driving involving cell phones and communications devices. In 2008, we learned that NHTSA had done a study in 2003 addressing this. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act saying we'd like to get all the records showing what you considered earlier and what you have to demonstrate the hazards. NHTSA denied the request. In one appeal and one lawsuit later in 2008, we found that the government had withheld hundreds of pages of documents on the hazards of cell phones and other technological distractions. And Secretary Mineta had before him a plan to go forward, much like Secretary LaHood has today on this very issue. But they not only withheld and actually took back all the copies of their research and reports, but they disbanded their program. The General Accounting Office has documented this. So the tragedy is we lost 6 years in which we could be doing what we're doing today. But and Secretary LaHood, to his credit, with the National Driving Summit, has moved forward on this. The President's order banning texting for government workers is a good step. But as welcome as these steps are, they are not nearly enough to offset the safety threat of driver distraction caused by technological devices in motor vehicles. And we don't even have an inventory of all the technologically distracting devices on the road today, let alone technologies that could help counter the distraction. We've made great strides in other areas, but we are at risk of losing some of the gains we've gotten through driver programs, advanced technology, and safer road design. And the Center for Auto Safety has 8 recommendations for this committee. And our recommendations in terms of moving forward are to require NHTSA's Special Crash Investigation Unit to conduct a study on cell phone crashes using cases reported to it, just as the agency has done for emerging technologies such as airbags that injured out-of-position occupants. That's our first recommendation. Our second recommendation is to require NHTSA to develop a safety standard that would require data recorders to indicate cell phone or other telematic device use during a crash. Our third recommendation is to require NHTSA to provide an annual report to Congress evaluating new electronic technologies that the auto and telecommunications industries are introducing and including in new cars to assess the potential for distraction. If you don't know what's going into the vehicles, you can't develop countermeasures for it. We have to get a handle on this. Our fourth recommendation is to enact H.R. 1895, the Safe Teen and Novice Driver Protection Act, which looks at younger drivers and their greater use of these devices and their greater risk of accident. So you're putting a device in teenagers' hands who are the least experienced drivers and the most prone for crashes. Our fifth recommendation is to recognize that most states today require a blood alcohol content test for drivers in fatal crashes. We'd like states to require and investigate in fatal crash investigations to determine whether cell phones were used. Our sixth recommendation is to require the telecommunications companies to provide information on cell phones and other communication devices' use for safety studies on fatal and injury-producing crashes. We'd want to, our seventh is to require NHTSA and the FCC to report on technology that can be used to prevent telematic device use while driving, similar to alcohol interlocks to prevent drunk driving. Alcohol interlocks were known for 20 years before we started using them. Let's not wait 20 years to see if there's comparable technology for technological distracting devices. And finally, we'd like to require vehicle manufacturers who integrate cell phones and other telematics into automatic crash notification systems in their vehicles to provide information on use of such devices in crashes recorded by the ACN system. There's a huge lack of data to define what the best solutions are to this enormous problem. We need more data, and the recommendations that we have will enable us to get the data, to develop the effective solutions, to reduce the trauma on the highway, and to prevent future deaths in distracted accidents such as happened to the Teater family. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, Mr. Teater. The chair now recognizes Mr. Strassburger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Stearns. Alliance members use cutting-edge safety technology to put people first. We are committed to advancing motor vehicle safety, and we take concerns about driver distraction seriously. From step one, we engineer new vehicle information and communication systems, telematics systems, to help the driver perform their primary task, a safe operation of their car or truck. We do this by engineering these systems according to our driver-focused telematics guidelines. The guidelines address essential safety aspects of driver interaction with visual manual interfaces. They consist of 24 principles that address the design, use, and installation of telematics systems. Each principle includes verification procedures, specific performance criteria, technical justification, and examples of good and bad practice.
Excuse me, Mr. Strassburger, is your mic on?
How's that, better?
That's better.
Let me highlight just two principles. Principle 1.4 addresses the positioning of visual in-vehicle telematic displays. The proper positioning of displays allows drivers to continue to monitor the roadway peripherally while looking at the display by positioning it close to the driver's normal line of sight. Principle 2.1 sets visual demand limits. Eyes off the road time is limited because functions or features are locked out while driving if visual demand exceeds set limits based on a baseline task, which is tuning the radio. The goal of the guidelines is to maximize eyes on road. It is a rare crash that occurs while a driver's eyes are on the roadway. When a driver's eyes are not, the risk of a crash increases. Studies involving actual driving, such as Virginia Tech's 100-car study and others, indicate that visual distraction is the primary concern. Looking away from the road scene is the principal contributor to crashes and near misses. The guidelines are now in their third iteration, and the Alliance is committed to updating them as scientific understanding of driver behavior continues to evolve. Every day, the industry is engaged in high-tech research and implementation of new safety technologies with real-world safety benefit, such as autonomous braking systems and vehicle safety communication systems for crash avoidance. Automakers are working on important safety enhancements right now that use wireless communications. In the near future, cars will be linked wirelessly to other cars near them and with their surroundings to enhance safety by informing drivers of hazards in situations they can't see. Real-time navigation will also be provided, which will be critical to advancing how we manage congestion and even further reduce CO2 emissions. So what should be done? And here these are not individual recommendations, but a package of recommendations. We need appropriate laws with high visibility enforcement. The Alliance supports a ban on handheld texting and handheld calling while driving to accelerate the transition to more advanced, safer ways to manage many common potential distractions. We need consumer education about these laws and to support law enforcement activities and to educate drivers that driving distractions are a risk so that drivers know that even with the cutting-edge safety technology found in today's cars, driving distractions are a risk. Not just handheld texting and handheld calling, but eating, drinking, searching for a CD. Anything that prolongs a driver's eyes off the road presents a risk. Finally, we need continued research so that we can further understand driver behaviors to enable the development of ever safer systems. And all of this should be done without severing the wireless communications link to vehicles, which will enable tomorrow's safety and environmental benefits. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that concludes my statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strassburger. And now, again, it's my pleasure to welcome back to this subcommittee, to this committee room, Mr. Steve Largent. Steve, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and good to see you again.
Thank you, Chairman Rush. Good to see you, too. And Ranking Member Stearns, good to see you. Thank you for convening this hearing today on distracted driving and for the opportunity to appear before this committee on behalf of CTIA. Both because of the committee's work on telecommunications policy matters and as a result of your individual experiences as consumers, you've witnessed the impressive growth in the use of wireless services over the past decade. Wireless devices allow consumers to stay in touch with family and friends, work on the go, receive news and information anytime and just about anywhere. A wireless device is also one of the best safety tools for consumers in emergency situations. In fact, wireless subscribers make more than 290,000 calls to 911 and other emergency services every day. While the industry recognizes the importance of wireless devices for public convenience and safety, CTIA and its member companies also know that drivers are faced with numerous distractions when they're on the road, and that some of these distractions may be caused by drivers' inappropriate use of wireless devices. Actions that require drivers to take their hands off the wheel and their eyes off the road are incompatible with safe driving. The solution to the problem of distracted driving starts with enhanced personal responsibility and the realization that the primary obligation of every driver is safety. But there are steps government and industry can take to modify and alleviate behavior that contributes to distracted driving. I'd like to briefly discuss with you our thoughts on what these steps are. Starting on the legislative front, we support passage of state legislation that would prohibit manual text and email messaging by all drivers. CTI has been working with the National Conference of State Legislatures and other state organizations. Through these efforts, we hope to encourage the adoption of consistent state legislation addressing this problem. While we are committed to this course, we also agree with Secretary LaHood and Chairman Genachowski that a single solution probably will not solve the problem of distracted driving. On the technology front, changes in the way roads are built, cars are designed, and of course in wireless technology, each can help to improve driver safety. Wireless service providers, handset manufacturers, and app developers are engaged in efforts to enhance the consumer's wireless experience, including developing technologies that will promote safer driving. However, technological solutions must fit within the existing legal framework that governs the industry, should not be based on technology mandates, and most importantly, must be consumer-friendly. Carriers and manufacturers can engineer all sorts of amazing capabilities into their products, but if consumers fail to adopt or enable those capabilities, we haven't achieved much of anything. The last piece of CTIA's prescription for safer driving is education, an area which we have a long record of working to inform the public about the relationship between safe driving and responsible wireless use. The most recent example of our commitment to education and outreach efforts is CTIA's partnership with the National Safety Council. We have launched a national campaign targeting parents and teenagers to raise awareness about the dangers of distracted driving. Through this partnership, we've created the On the Road, Off the Phone campaign. The centerpiece of this effort is a hard-hitting television commercial that we have distributed to more than 600 stations across the country. It also can be viewed on a website we created to provide parents with tips on how to talk to their teens about safe driving. I'd like to take a moment to share the PSA with you. As I believe the PSA demonstrates, the wireless industry shares your desire to promote safer driving. This is a challenge we should address together, and we look forward to working with you to do just that. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Dingus for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Rush, Mr. Stearns, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important topic. I'm testifying before you today as a 25-year veteran of driving safety research. My opinions today are based on real-world driving data gathered using a new method, naturalistic driving studies. This method involves installation of sophisticated instrumentation, including cameras and other sensors, in participants' own vehicles for months at a time. Naturalistic data collection has provided and will continue to provide new insight into the driving distraction problem. With these data, BTTI can provide a clear picture of driver behavior and risk perception under real-world driving conditions. Our naturalistic driving data have produced discoveries that must be carefully considered in determining an appropriate action to this growing problem. First, the distraction issues that we face today are much different than those we faced just a few years ago, and consequently are resulting in a growing number of crashes. Texting, typing, reading, and dialing are much, much worse than eating, tuning a radio, or talking. Second, our driving distraction problem is particularly time critical because the number of crashes involving complex tasks is growing exponentially. Third, while safety benefits can be realized with the deployment of electronic devices, these benefits can be attained only in vehicles engineered to minimize driver distraction. Fourth, teen drivers, by far, represent the largest population of those who engage in complex tasks while they drive, and consequently are at the greatest risk. Fifth, the problem of driver distraction associated with electronic devices is multidimensional, requiring multiple solutions. For example, history has shown that education and public awareness efforts, although necessary, will be insufficient in and of themselves to protect the public. In conclusion, driving distraction associated with electronic devices is creating a serious and growing public health risk. Due to this risk and the rapid deployment of these technologies, quick and decisive action is needed. However, measured action is also warranted so that the solutions enacted with good intent do not stifle improvements in driving safety. Therefore, I recommend the following approach. First, a primary law banning the use of handheld wireless devices in a moving vehicle. This law should preclude the use of cell phones, MP3 players, Blackberries, iPhones, etc., as well as headset use with conventional phones. It should also exclude true hands-free and in-vehicle devices that are simple to operate and do not require substantial eye-off road time. This law should carry a significant monetary fine and points. It should include a total cell phone ban for newly licensed teens and for special cases such as school buses and other special cases. It should exclude emergency communications for all users. Second, we need a regulation limiting the functionality of visually demanding in-vehicle devices in moving vehicles. This includes such tasks as manual navigation, destination entry, and all keyboard tasks, including those for heavy trucks, and should include all complex reading tasks. Third, standards for testing of potentially distracting devices prior to market introduction need to be broadly applied. These three things will help substantially with our current driving distraction epidemic. Thank you very much.
The chair thanks the gentleman. Now the chair recognizes Dr. McCart. Dr. McCart, welcome to this hearing, and we recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Rush and Ranking Member Stearns. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is a nonprofit research and communications organization whose mission is to reduce the deaths, injuries, and property damage that occur on our nation's roads. We are supported by U.S. auto insurers. Thank you for the opportunity to share our research. Cell phone use while driving in the U.S. is widespread and increasing. We need to look at what we know and don't know about the problem and potential solutions. The public is not well served by rushing to propose solutions that may not work. The cumulative evidence from various types of studies points toward cell phone use as a risk factor for crashes and impaired driving performance. There are discrepant estimates of the magnitude of the risk, but there is little doubt that this is a problem for highway safety. You've heard testimony that the problem is drivers taking their eyes off the road rather than talking on phones. But this assertion is based on analyses of safety-relevant events that included only a small number of crashes. And it is contradicted by 2 well-controlled studies, including one by our institute, that verified phone use in large samples of crash-involved drivers and found that the risk of crashing was 4 times higher when a driver was talking on either a hands-free or a handheld phone. My remarks today will focus on the effects of laws banning drivers' phone use. 7 states and the District of Columbia make it illegal to talk on a handheld phone while driving. The Institute studied driver responses to 3 of these bans. There was considerable variation in the effects, but the results show that bans can produce large and long-term reductions in drivers' handheld phone use. Based on a study of North Carolina's ban on teen drivers' use of any kind of phone, age-focused laws may have much less effect, especially if teens perceive the ban as not being enforced. But the safety effects of handheld bans are unknown. Many drivers still use handheld phones even where use is banned, and other drivers may simply switch to hands-free. Given that crash risk increases substantially while talking on either handheld or hands-free phones, bans on handheld phones won't eliminate crashes for those who switch to hands-free. We also don't know the effects of bans on total time that drivers talk. If drivers who switch to hands-free devices have longer or more conversations than when they were using handheld, then the total time at risk for a distraction-related crash may increase. Laws limiting drivers' use of all electronic devices make the most sense based on research, but enforcing such laws would be problematic. As part of ongoing research to understand the implications of bans, the Institute is examining insurance collision claim frequencies in states that enacted handheld phone bans. Figure 2 in my written testimony shows monthly rates of collision claims for California during the 18 months before and the 12 months after a handheld ban took effect in July 2008. The figure also shows claim rates aggregated across neighboring states of Arizona, Nevada, and Oregon. Although the rates vary considerably month to month, there is no notable change in California's collision claim rate associated with the ban. Overall, the month-to-month changes in claim rates in the months leading up to and following the ban are very similar to those for the comparison states. Similar analyses for New York State and the District of Columbia tell a similar story. No apparent reduction in collision claim risk coincident with a handheld phone ban. These analyses are preliminary. They are simple, descriptive statistics of collision claims risk over time. However, they raise questions about the potential effectiveness of handheld cell phone bans in terms of the most important variable, the safety of our roads. They indicate a need to better understand how and when drivers use phones and how cell phone bans affect that usage and crash risk. Some have proposed that educational campaigns will reduce phone use and texting while driving. However, education alone has not proven effective in changing driver behavior. Besides, survey shows that most people agree that drivers should not phone and drive, even many of those who admit that they do so. A potential approach is curbing drivers' phone use with technology that can control how and when motorists use their phones. The main customers for such technology may be fleet managers or parents of teenage drivers. However, phone blockers of any sort aren't yet in widespread use and their real-world effects aren't known. Driver error has long been the most frequent proximal cause of crashes. To prevent or mitigate some of these errors, automakers and their suppliers are introducing various technologies designed to alert drivers to imminent collisions or dangerous situations, and in some cases to automatically brake or correct the course of a vehicle. It's important to consider that these new technologies may offer some protection against distractions from cell phone use or other sources. Before policymakers can make sound decisions about what countermeasures to adopt, we need better evidence on several issues. But the most serious deficit in our knowledge is that we do not know whether laws banning drivers' phone use have reduced the frequency of crashes. Before we encourage or require that more states pass bans, we need to establish whether they enhance traffic safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's certainly some very interesting and provocative questions that you, testimony that you presented. And the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Let me just ask this, and Dr. McCart, you might be able to answer this question. Is there any activity or any a requirement at the state level that in driver's ed, and certainly before a teenager can get any permit to drive, that there be some kind of coursework or at least some kind of information or some type of sharing of information with the student so they can become aware even at that moment when they're in a driver's education class or in a driver's, before they get a permit?
I want to make sure I understood your question. You're asking me whether state driver ed programs include information?
Well, in my state of Illinois, you know, I believe if you're 16, then you can apply for a permit. And before you can get that permit, you have to have so many hours in high school to discuss traffic safety, safe operation of vehicle, and other kinds of issues they deal with. But I'm not certain that they actually segregate and focus on the problems associated with cell phone use and driver distraction. My question is, do you know of any state, is it widespread among all the states, or is there any states who are at the forefront of trying to proactively teach this to our high school students at the moment when they are making some definitive actions trying to secure the ability and the license to drive?
I'm not sure whether it's common in driver education classes to include information on distraction. I think, however, that as a cautionary note, driver education can be an effective way to teach the basic rules of the road, but it hasn't been an effective way to reduce crashes. I think teens, like adults, generally need more than education about a risk to cease from that risky behavior. So education may have a short-term effect, but in the long term, unfortunately, drivers usually need more than education to change their behavior.
All right. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add or say about that question? Because it seems to me that this is a point where the first time you could really, in a structured way, get the attention of children as it relates to distracted driving. And I'm not sure if there's a requirement at any state level that that the issue of distracted driving is a part of any curriculum. And I'm just asking, is anyone aware of that?
I think it's, you know, it's being included in driver programs. Some states have GDL requirements that limit or eliminate wireless device use. But I have to agree with Dr. McCart. You know, that's a necessary thing to do, is to educate young people, but it is insufficient. You're really not. You know, it's hard, very hard
Thank you very
the
much.
behavior of teenagers.
Thank you very much. Dr. McCarthy, other countries have taken a more aggressive approach against cell phone usage while driving. For example, most EU member states prohibit handheld cell phone use while driving. Japan and Israel have complete bans on cell phone use while driving. What do you think the U.S. can learn from other countries? And are nations that have been more successful in compliance or more effective in enforcement, are these nations more successful or more effective in their enforcement? Dr. McCarthy.
You're asking about the enforcement of the laws?
Yeah, what can the U.S. learn from other countries?
Well, in other areas of highway safety, belt use is the best example. What has really gotten belt use at a very high level in this country is not only enforcement, but enforcement that's strongly publicized. When we've looked at states that have handheld phone bans, we actually do see pretty high levels of enforcement, but we think one issue is that this enforcement isn't publicized. So, I think handheld bans can be enforced. I think the issue, as I suggested in my testimony, is that if drivers simply switch to hands-free, that won't eliminate the crash risk associated with talking on phones. But well-publicized enforcement is a very, very strongly proven countermeasure in this country.
My time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Teater, I have 3 sons, and during the break I text messaged them telling them not to drive, and text message they all came back and said, yes, sir. So let me just offer my sympathy and commend you for your advocacy here, and also for taking of your life and time to do this in remembrance of your son, and we're all very sympathetic of it. When I get into my van, a new van, if I don't put my seatbelt on, I hear a bing, 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 and I can't get rid of this bing. I made sure that anybody gets in this, and if the passenger side happens to get in, they don't put their seatbelt on, it's a bing, bing, bing. So, Mr. Strassburger, it seems to me that the automobile companies could work out some procedures, and then Mr. Large and I got some ideas that the cell phone companies could do. For example, it was briefly touched upon, is a vehicle could sense and give a large buzz or sound to the driver if they were on the cell and not paying attention. There seems, what I'm hearing from Dr. McCart is that we can legislate, but we can't necessarily enforce it. And so maybe the combination of technology on the phone and technology in the vehicle, we can stop this, much like I got to put my seatbelt on, I got to listen to this bing, bing, bing forever. So isn't there something that the automobile manufacturers could do in addition to, let's say all the states passed the law, and whatever we did in the federal level, I mean, 45,000 people die every year of automobile accidents. Mr. LaHood, the Secretary, couldn't say of the 6,000 that were distracted, how many of those were due to text messages. So maybe the larger issues between the cell phone companies and the automobile manufacturers, we could institute some preventive procedures.
Congressman, we know how to do this.
Yeah, because when we back up now, there's a buzzer that comes off and you back up.
We know how to do this.
Yeah.
And the model is the model that you mentioned this morning, which is the same model that we use to reduce or to increase safety belt use that we've used to reduce drunk driving. And it's 3 things. And you know, after this is probably my 3rd hearing now on this issue, and there are a lot of questions about education. But we need 3 things. We need strong laws visibly enforced. We need education about those laws, the fact that they are being enforced, so that we know that we create the perception that if you drive distracted, you're going to be caught and you're going to be fined, or maybe even assessed points. And then there is a technology component. We are, at the Alliance at least, doing that by designing our systems pursuant to our guidelines, which are very well rigorously based in sound science and the research, to mitigate and manage the driver distraction, so that when you do enter a car, and if you are carrying in a device, you can connect that device either physically or electronically, and then it becomes integrated with the operation of the vehicle and subject to our guidelines.
Yeah.
So we know how to do this.
Okay. I was also thinking that in the case of the son, Mr. Teeter's son, that woman, when she started to get distracted, there was something in the car would alert her that she's being distracted because the distance in the radar between her and the vehicle she's going to hit would signal and her speed, and it'd be an automatically flash that she would know.
There are other technologies, absolutely, that we are working on.
Yeah,
driver assist technologies.
Okay.
That could, but the one thing we cannot do is understand what you are thinking. We cannot measure when
Okay.
you are cognitive.
Mr. Largent, you know, when you have a phone, you can get GPS on this. And so with the GPS, they'll tell me where my phone is. And is it possible that some technological advance could be done into the cell phone that would sense that when a person is using text messages at a certain speed or something, that it would not work? Or is there something that could be put into the cell phone tied to the GPS that would say you are text messaging while you're driving or something? I mean, is there anything in your area that people have talked about? I'm just curious.
Well, great idea. There's about 6 companies that are already doing it.
Wow.
I've become aware of at least 6 or 7 companies that have approached my office to say that they are developing either applications that you just simply download on your phone or actual augmentation to a cellular phone that actually would shut it down after when the phone senses that it's traveling at more than 5 miles an hour.
Right.
It will shut down your ability to use the phone.
So if you're going to text message, you got to stop the phone. I mean, you got to stop your car.
That's right.
Yeah, that seems pretty easy to do. Dr. McCart, I mean, your testimony was factual, but what you're basically saying that if we pass these laws, there's no assurance, there's no evidence that it will stop people from using them and distracting themselves. There's no evidence that passing laws will do anything. Is that what you're saying?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, and then you're also saying that we have no idea how many people are actually, in the case of Mr. Teeter's son, that are actually been distracted and died because, well, there's 45,000 people who have died every year in automobile accidents. And Mr. LaHood, the Secretary, said there's 6,000 are distracted, but he doesn't know how many. So we have no idea how many really are a case like Mr. Teeter. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because if you think of a car crash after it's occurred, it's almost impossible for a police officer to document that someone was talking on a phone or
Mr. Teeter found out that the woman who caused it, he found everything about it. So
yes, you can in some cases,
yeah.
but as a general matter, it's not always possible unless a driver volunteers or someone witnessed the crash. It can be difficult for a police officer to document it, and even if it's known, it's not always documented in a police crash report.
okay, Mr. Teeter, I'm going to let you have the last word here. I assume that you would like the federal government to pass a law forbidding this, or would you want to do it like we did with the seat belts, which we say the states will get grants if they adopt this law as an incentive? What is your ultimate, if you could wave a wand today, what would you like done?
Well, whatever would get it done the fastest, and I guess I'm not as experienced with these things as I should be to recommend that, but I do believe that this is a problem that's come up on us very, very quickly, and it's going to escalate very quickly if we don't get ahead of it. I agree with Dr. McCart. We do not know how many crashes are caused. It's hard to determine that. I like the questions about the technology. Some of the ideas you've thrown out have been tested. They're out there.
Yeah, I mean,
We need to get them to market. We need to get them to market quickly. I know that at least employers in this country and parents in this country would use these technologies for their kids and their employees without any incentive or law. They do it tomorrow, and we make our roadways safer. So, you know, we have to move forward on all fronts as fast as possible. And I do think that it is time for federal leadership, probably because it's come up so suddenly. And I believe that we can move faster at this level than we can at every state level. Some states move fast, I know, but, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Inslee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Teater. You said that you helped launch a technology startup company to help solve this problem. Could you just briefly tell me what that is? I may have missed your testimony. But.
Yeah, well, there's, and first of all, also in my testimony, it needs to be noted that I worked for one of these companies and helped launch one of these companies for a year, so I got to know, obviously, what they're doing and how their technology...
Just real briefly, what's it do?
Well, if you tried to call me and I'm driving, you would get a recorded message that says it appears the caller is driving, Mr. Teeter's driving. Press 1 to go to voicemail, press 2 to leave an emergency voice page, or press 3 to have your call automatically connected at the end of his journey.
So if we do that, would that also disable a passenger's?
No, there's a passenger override function which can be offered by the employer or by the parent. They may not choose to offer that. Whenever you override as a passenger, it's reported back to the employer or the parent. So
great, I appreciate it. Sounds really interesting. Congratulations on your work. Thank you for your work.
But it's not just that company. There's at least 6 or 7 others that have various products like that. They're ready to go to market.
Great, that's exciting. I want to ask about the issue of hands-free sets. I think it's very well established that we have a problem associated with visual distraction and tactile distraction drivers. I think that's very, very clear. The question in my mind is for hands-free technology, which presents a non-visual, non-tactile disruption, but it is a cognitive issue, how should we think of that? I'll just tell you my reaction. I haven't seen any research about this, but my reaction is it shouldn't be any significantly different than talking to a passenger in the car. And my immediate reaction is that talking to a passenger in a car is not a distraction that is going to be one that we will try to legislate or should try to legislate. And my immediate reaction is not to distinguish a hands-free conversation from a conversation with a passenger in the car, and therefore we shouldn't try to legislate against a hands-free situation. And I would just ask anyone who has any science to discuss what we know about that or don't know about that. I would appreciate knowing about it. If any of our panel want to address that issue.
I can start. Our institute did a study, I mentioned in my summary, a similar study was done in Canada, where we were able to verify phone use of drivers involved in crashes. And we also had information from them about whether it was handheld or hands-free. And what we found in our study was that the risk of crashing was 4 times higher when someone was talking on the phone. We didn't know about the dialing aspect, and that there was no significant difference between the risk when the person was using a handheld or a hands-free phone. There are also a lot of experimental studies, simulators, test tracks that show that drivers are similarly distracted, whether conversing handheld or hands-free. I think the main distinction between passengers and a telephone conversation is that passengers are in the vehicle with the driver. So if you exclude teen passengers who do have a higher crash risk with passengers, when you look at crashes involving adults, what you see is often a protective effect of passengers because they may be helping the driver in the driving situation and know when to talk or not talk. When someone is on the other end of a phone, they're not driving with you, so they can't adjust the conversation to the demands of the driving situation. But I think that this is one area that the research has not really clearly established, whether fully hands-free, for example, might have some margin of safety, but I think it won't eliminate. I think hands-free phones won't eliminate distraction.
And is it clear, at least right now, that there's some fellows were showing me some research yesterday that suggested there was a very significant increase in risk associated with texting, like a 20-fold increase in rates of accident, but nothing ever approaching anything close to that for a hands-free scenario. Does anybody Is there a
Well, again,
distinction there?
In our study, we found a fourfold increase in crashing,
And how about
talking on a
texting?
hands-free phone.
How about texting?
We didn't look at texting. When we did our study, texting was rare, but I think even without research, it's obvious that texting is extremely unsafe. The estimate of texting, though, and Dr. Dinkus can speak to the research, it's his, it involved events, very few of which were crashes. So I don't think we have a really precise estimate at this point based on real-world crashes of the crash risk associated with texting. But I'm sure there is a substantial risk.
Dr. Dingus, could you?
Well, I think what Ann says is true. Hands-free and handheld conversation is not much different. The issue becomes how risky is that? I don't believe the fourfold increase. I think it's less than twofold, but I think it's greater than one, so it is an issue. But the act of holding the phone to one's ear versus not holding the phone to one's ear is not the issue. The issue is taking your eyes off the road. There are really good simulator studies that show that if you are engaged in a really complex conversation, emotional conversation on a cell phone, your reaction time is delayed about 0.3 of a second. We have data from truck drivers where their eyes are off the road for 5 seconds. And that's the magnitude of the difference in the risk that you're talking about. Ann's right. The 23-fold increase, we don't have precise estimate about that, but I guarantee you it's higher than 15 and probably close to 20.
And is there anything comparing conversations with a passenger in the car, comparing to passengers in a hands-free environment with someone outside of the car?
Sure. I mean, we have a...
Well, let me just ask you a first question. Is there any evidence that having passengers in the car and or having conversations with those passengers is a distraction that increases the crash risk?
You have to think about it in the larger context of driving. Passengers can be a distraction, but they also have benefits in the larger context. My wife, for example, serves as a collision avoidance device because she's also a lookout. Plus, if you're an adult driver, you drive differently when passengers are in the car.
So what's the evidence net for having passengers? Is a 32-year-old
the net for adults is a benefit. The net for teens is a detriment.
Okay.
So,
anyone else want to add something, Mr.
The University of Utah did a simulator study where they put two people, a passenger and a driver, in a simulator, told them to drive down and get off the first rest area, and all of them did. They then had a person talking on a hands-free cell phone drive down the same road, gave them the same instructions, get off at the rest area, and I think about 60% of them missed the rest area. In the first example, again, the passenger was in the driving environment, even helped point out the rest area. When there's a passenger, there's a needed pause in a conversation because a light suddenly turns yellow or someone's about to pull out, the conversation stops. When we're in a conversation on a cell phone with someone not in our environment, there's a totally different cognitive function going on in the brain. We're engaged in another remote space, so we don't see what's in front of us. It's a pretty significant difference, and that's one specific piece of research that compared those two.
And if I could, we need to look at the full body of research and reconcile that. And when you do that, I think you look at sure, there are simulator studies that suggest that the magnitude of cognitive distraction may be very, very concerning. But when you calibrate that research and compare it to the on-road actual driving research that Dr. Dingus has done, the naturalistic research, you find that the role of cognitive distraction would appear to be much less. So we need to be thinking about how we manage and mitigate this risk, which is what we are doing with our guidelines here. Is talking on a cell phone, hands-free or handheld, pose a potential risk? Yes, because it potentially takes your eyes off the road and potentially your mind off the road. But the real-world driving studies that Dr. Dingus has done doesn't support the claims made about the significant risk to cognitive distraction. And I liken that to we ourselves test vehicles on a computer. But we would not put that vehicle on the road until we tested that car in the real world against a crash barrier or otherwise. And that's the same kind of thing. You can do simulated studies. They have value. They allow you to iterate through various designs and research various things. But at the end of the day, you need to calibrate yourself with real-world testing.
By the way, before I forget, I just want to ask this. What is the research on eating in a car as a driver who is eating? How do those numbers stack up to these?
Eating, drinking, talking to passengers is much lower than the much lower than the tasks that require you to take your eyes off the road for a long time, like texting, dialing, reading, and it's true in both cars and trucks.
How does eating? I'm sorry.
You've been very gracious in terms of your time. As a matter of fact, you had double the time that you were really allocated. So, I don't want to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I really do not want to further ask these witnesses to sacrifice any more of your time. You have been very, very good to us. You've been very gracious with your time. We certainly appreciate you spending this time with this subcommittee. And again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. But this committee hearing is now adjourned.
There was a good answer. Well, let's get him the answer.
The next time you're in town again, give me a call.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
And strategize.
I'd like to do that. Good. And I didn't